The crib was cold. Not just empty, cold. Like nothing warm had been in it for hours. Denise pressed her hand flat against the mattress and stood there, frozen, her brain refusing to make sense of what her body already knew. Her baby was gone. The day had started like any other. Denise woke up at 6 in the morning the way she always did since bringing baby Marcus home from the hospital 4 days ago. 4 days. He was only 4 days old. She had barely learned the sound of his cry, barely figured out how to hold his tiny head without her hands shaking. And now the crib was empty, and the blanket was cold, and the room was so quiet it made her ears ring. She checked the bathroom, the hallway. She called out for the night nurse, a woman named Pat who the hospital had assigned to help new mothers in the first week home. No answer. Pat was gone too. Denise grabbed her phone and called her husband Derek. He picked up on the second ring, already at the office, his voice calm and warm the way it always was. "Hey, babe. Marcus is gone." Silence. "What do you mean, gone?" "I mean he's not here, Derek. The crib is empty. Pat is gone. I checked every room." She heard him stand up from his chair, heard keys jingling. "Call the police, right now. I'm on my way." Before we continue, do subscribe so you don't miss on our interesting tales. Like and share so we feel you. Also, comment. Tell us how you feel about our tales, how you first came across it, where you're watching from, and let's keep the section lively like a family as we continue. 2 officers arrived within 8 minutes. They walked through the house slowly, asking questions in the careful, neutral tone that police used when they weren't sure yet whether they were dealing with a crazy woman or a real crime. Denise answered everything. Yes, the doors were locked. No, there were no signs of a break-in. Yes, the nurse had a key. No, she hadn't known Pat before the hospital arranged the placement. One of the officers wrote something down and said they would look into it. Denise stood in the middle of her living room in her pajamas and felt the world tipping sideways under her feet. Derek arrived 20 minutes later. He was a tall man, broad-shouldered, the kind of man who filled a doorway when he walked through it. He had built his company from nothing, a logistics firm that had grown into something worth more money than either of them had ever dreamed about growing up. People in their city knew his name. His picture had been in magazines. None of that meant anything right now. He walked straight to Denise and held her so tight she could feel him shaking. "We're going to find him," he said. She nodded against his chest because she didn't trust her voice. The police came back that afternoon with an update. The nurse, Pat Simmons, had not shown up to her listed address. Her phone was off. The agency that had placed her with the family, a small home care company called Sunrise Nursing Services, was suddenly unreachable. The number rang and rang. The office address turned out to be a mail forwarding service in a strip mall across town. The whole thing had been fake. The agency was fake. The nurse was fake. Someone had built an entire false front just to get a woman inside their home, close to their newborn son. When the detective assigned to the case, a quiet man named Walt sat down across from them at the kitchen table and explained all of this, Denise watched Derek's face go very still. She had been married to him long enough to know what that stillness meant. He wasn't panicking. He was thinking hard. "Who knew we were using a home care agency?" Walt asked. "I mentioned it to a few people. My mother, my sister, my friend Bridget." Walt looked at Derek. "And you?" He was quiet for a moment. He looked down at the table. His jaw tightened. "Derek," Denise said softly. "Carla." The name landed in the room like something dropped from a great height. Denise had heard that name exactly once before, about 8 months into her marriage to Derek. He had told her, simply and without drama, that he had dated a woman named Carla for 2 years before they met, that it had ended badly, that Carla had not taken it well. He had said it the way people mentioned an old scar, something healed over, nothing worth picking at. Denise looked at her husband now and felt something cold move through her that had nothing to do with the empty crib. "Why were you on the phone with Carla?" she asked. "She called me, said she wanted to apologize for how things ended between us. I thought it was nothing. I told her you just had the baby. I mentioned the nurse agency. He pressed his mouth over. God, I mentioned the nurse agency. Walt wrote something down. That night, after the detective left and the house was full of a silence that felt nothing like peace, Denise sat in the nursery in the rocking chair Derek had built with his own hands. She looked at the empty crib. She looked at the little name sign on the wall, Marcus, painted in blue and gold. She made herself a promise in that quiet room. She was going to get her son back, and whoever took him was going to wish they never heard the name Denise Crawford. Carla didn't hate Derek. That was the thing people would never understand. She didn't hate him at all. She had loved him, deeply, completely, the kind of love that rearranges everything inside you. And when he left, when he moved on and married another woman and built a life that should have been hers, something in Carla didn't break. It made a plan. It had started 2 years ago, sitting in her car outside Derek's office building, watching him walk out laughing with 2 of his employees. He looked happy, relaxed, successful. The company had just been valued at close to $400 million. She had read the article 3 times. She had been with him when he had nothing. She had sat across from him at a folding table in his first apartment while he drew out his business ideas on notebook paper. She had believed in him before anyone else did. And he had left her for a quieter woman with a warm smile, who had never had to believe in anything because she had walked into a life that was already built. Carla drove home that night and sat in her kitchen for a long time. Then she called her cousin. Her cousin's name was Deb. Deb was not a good person and had never pretended to be. She moved in circles that Carla had always kept her distance from, people who knew how to make things happen quietly, people who understood that money could open almost any door if you knocked the right way. Carla had never needed any of that before. She needed it now. I need something specific, Carla told Deb, and I need it done clean. Deb listened. Then she told Carla what it would cost. Carla didn't flinch. The plan was simple in the way that dangerous things often are. Carla had no biological claim to Derek's money. They had never married. There was no contract between them, no shared property, nothing on paper that connected her to a single dollar of what he had built. She had thought about suing him, alienation, emotional damage, something, but her lawyer had laughed, not unkindly, and told her she had no case. But a child was different. A child, if it was Derek's, meant 18 years of support at minimum. It meant leverage. It meant that in a messy enough legal battle, with the right documents and the right story, she could walk away with more money than most people would see in 10 lifetimes. She just needed a child. And she needed that child to be a newborn, young enough that no one could easily disprove her claim that it was conceived during a secret affair. She had done her research. DNA testing was the obvious obstacle, but Carla had thought about that too. She didn't need to win forever. She just needed to win long enough. And this all is just not being able to accept the fact that Derek has moved on. The nurse Carla found, her real name wasn't Pat Simmons, it was Gloria, and she had lost her nursing license 3 years earlier after a medication incident at a hospital in another state. She needed money badly enough to do things she would not have considered before. Deb brought her in, explained the job, and paid her half up front. The fake agency took 2 weeks to set up, a website, a phone number, a mailing address, enough to look real to a busy couple with a newborn and 100 other things on their minds. Carla had gotten the information about the home care plan from Derek himself. He had mentioned it casually, the way he always shared things with her during that phone call she had worked hard to make sound like nothing. Just an old girlfriend making peace, just closure. He had no idea he was handing her the key. Gloria was placed in the home without a single problem. She was professional, calm, trustworthy looking. Denise had let her in without hesitation. Why wouldn't she? The agency had checked out. The references had checked out. Everything had checked out because Carla had paid for everything to check out. On the 4th night, while Denise slept and Derek was at a late meeting, Gloria wrapped baby Marcus in a clean blanket, walked out the back door, and put him in the car that Deb was waiting in at the end of the street. It took less than 4 minutes. Carla was waiting at the house she had rented under a different name 2 states away. When Deb walked in with the baby, Carla stood up from the couch and felt something move through her that she hadn't expected. He was so small. She had thought of him as a piece of a plan for so long that she had forgotten he was a real thing, a real person. Tiny fingers and a soft face and a smell that made something ache in her chest. She stood over him for a long time without speaking. Then she picked him up. She told herself it was temporary. She told herself she was not a monster. She would take care of him, keep him safe, make sure he had everything he needed. This was business. This was about what she was owed. The boy would be fine. She named him something she liked, told the few people around her that she had just had a baby, kept her circle small and her location quiet. For a while it worked. But Carla had made one mistake. Not in the planning, not in the execution. The mistake had come earlier than all of it. Something small, something she had not thought twice about at the time. She had told one person the truth. Not Deb, not Gloria. Someone she trusted more than either of them. Someone she had cried to on the phone the night she first made the decision. Someone who had listened quietly and said almost nothing. Someone who had also, very quietly, kept every single text message they had ever exchanged. Carla didn't know that yet. She was still sitting in a rented house 2 states away, rocking another woman's baby, running the numbers in her head, waiting for the right moment to make her move. She thought she had won. She walked into the building like she owned it. That was the thing about Carla. Even when everything was about to collapse under her feet, she carried herself like the ground was solid. It had been 3 years since Marcus disappeared. 3 years of Denise waking up in the middle of the night reaching for a child who wasn't there. 3 years of Derek throwing money at private investigators, lawyers, tip lines, databases. 3 years of sitting across from detectives who were trying their best but kept hitting walls. The police had connected Carla to the fake agency early on. They had questioned her. She had an answer for everything. Calm, detailed, airtight. Her lawyer sat beside her and the whole thing went nowhere. There was no physical evidence connecting her directly. Gloria had vanished. Deb had vanished. And Carla had smiled politely and said she had no idea what they were talking about. Denise had watched her on a police interview recording once. She'd only been able to watch about 30 seconds before Derek turned it off because Denise's hands were shaking so hard she had knocked a glass off the table. But then came Betty. Betty was 48 years old, once a street girl but retired, and had known Carla since Carla was a teenager growing up on the same street. She was the person Carla had called that night, the one she had cried to, the one she had told everything to. Betty had listened, had said almost nothing, had kept every text message. Betty had also watched the news. She had seen Denise's face on television, a young mother, hollow-eyed, holding a picture of her missing son and asking anyone with information to please come forward. Betty had sat with that image for 2 years, carrying it like a stone in her chest, telling herself it wasn't her place, telling herself she must have misunderstood, telling herself Carla wouldn't really do something like that. Then one morning, Betty was at church, and the pastor read a verse about what happens when good people stay quiet. Betty went home and called the FBI. She handed over everything. The texts were detailed. Carla had been careless in ways that only people who trust someone completely are careless. She had written things out in plain language, names, timelines, her own words describing exactly what she intended to do and why. Betty sat in a federal office for 4 hours and answered every question they had. It still took time. Evidence had to be verified. Locations had to be traced. But investigators found Gloria living quietly in a town in the Midwest under a name that was almost but not quite different from her real one. She had spent 3 years waiting to be found. When the agents knocked on her door, she opened it and said simply, "I wondered when you were coming." She told them everything in exchange for a reduced charge. The rented house, the handoff, the money, all of it. By the time they found Marcus, he was 3 years old, healthy, and had been living with Carla under the name she had given him. He didn't know anything was wrong. He knew Carla as the only mother he had ever understood. He had a stuffed bear he carried everywhere, and a laugh that Denise, when she finally heard it on a recorded call the investigators played for her, recognized immediately because it was the same as Derek's. She cried for an hour straight after hearing that laugh.
Carla didn't know any of this was coming when she walked into Derek's attorney's office on a Tuesday morning in March. She had decided the time was right. 3 years felt long enough for things to cool, long enough to establish herself as the primary caregiver, long enough to build the story she planned to tell. She sat down across from Derek's lawyer, a sharp woman named Donna, and placed a folder on the table. Inside was a fabricated document she had paid a lot of money for. A birth certificate, medical records, a signed statement from a doctor who no longer practiced anywhere that could be easily verified. The document said that Marcus had been born of a private affair between her and Derek, that she had kept it quiet out of respect for his marriage, that she was coming forward now because the child deserved to know his father and because she deserved to be compensated for raising him alone. She had rehearsed a speech, something dignified, something that sounded like a woman who had been wronged, not a woman who had committed a federal crime. She never got to give it. Donna looked at the folder. Then she looked up at Carla and said, "There are 2 FBI agents outside this building. I want you to know that before I tell you what I'm about to tell you." Carla's smile stayed on her face for a moment the way a light stays on after you flip the switch, just a half second before it goes dark. "We know where Marcus has been. We know what you did. We know about Gloria, we know about the agency, and we have every text message you sent to a woman named Betty going back 4 years. Donna folded her hands on the table. "The only reason you were allowed to walk in here today instead of being arrested at home is because Derek wanted to be in the building when it happened." Carla turned her head. Derek was standing in the doorway. He had been there the whole time. He looked at her for a long moment without speaking, not with anger, not with satisfaction, just with a quiet, tired sadness that was somehow worse than anything else he could have shown her. "Where is my son, Carla?" Derek asked. Her mouth opened. Nothing came out. Marcus came home on a Thursday. Denise stood on the front porch and watched the car pull into the driveway, and when the door opened and a little boy climbed out holding a stuffed bear, she walked down the steps, crossed the yard, and got down on her knees in the grass in front of him. He looked at her with Derek's eyes. "Hi," she said. Her voice barely worked. He studied her face the way small children do, seriously, carefully, like they're reading something. Then he held out his bear. "His name is Blue," he said. Denise took the bear with both hands and held it carefully. "That's a really good name," she said. He nodded like he already knew that. Behind her, she heard Derek come down the steps. She heard him make a sound she had never heard from him before, something that came from so deep it didn't have a name. She didn't turn around. She just stayed on her knees in the grass, holding that little stuffed bear while her family put itself back together around her. Carla was arrested before she left the parking garage that day. She faced federal charges, kidnapping, fraud, and conspiracy. Her lawyer told her to take the deal. She took it. She got 12 years. Betty never asked for anything. Denise sent her flowers once a year anyway. And every night, without fail, Denise stood in the doorway of a little boy's room and watched him sleep, Blue the bear tucked under one arm, his chest rising and falling in the quiet dark. And she stayed there just long enough to make sure the room was warm. It always was.